So as I kind of briefly said before, the general species that are caught in ghost nets are turtles. Unfortunately, we find a large proportion of turtles, specifically the Olive Ridley. As you can see, this was found just near in North Mali. We found a huge net. This net had 2 turtles in it. We released both turtles, luckily. But you can see the back flipper, the back right flipper, is actually entangled in the rope, in the fishing net. And it's struggling, it's trying to escape, had a really deep laceration around that back flipper as well. So why is it the Olive Ridley? Why is it not the hawksbill? Why is it not the green turtle? Well, to kind of answer that sort of question, you need to, again, take a step back and have a look at the characteristics of the Olive Ridley, which may put it at risk. Obviously, they occur throughout the Indian Ocean, like most species, like most of the 5 species of turtle. They occur throughout the Indian Ocean, from the east and west coast of India, Sri Lanka, also Indonesia, all the northern borders, and Oman and Yemen as well. Madagascar. There's sporadic nesting going on all around, so on the east and the west coast of India, but there's a really large population, and we'll talk about in a second. But they do travel great distances between feeding and breeding grounds, so often once they've matured and they become sexually mature, they finish breeding, they then will migrate often entire oceans to go back to their feeding grounds. So they are interacting with many different fisheries in the Indian Ocean, and they can encounter many different ghost nets along their way. There's not much information, like most species of turtle, about the juvenile life stages. It's thought that they generally follow oceanic currents, again, putting them at risk of being caught by ghost nets and putting them in danger of interacting with fishing techniques to become bycatch. They reach sexual maturity around 20 years of age, so for about 20 years they're basically oceanic, they're just following the ocean currents. And once they reach sexual maturity, they're around 60 centimeters in carapace length. They're not commonly sighted in the Maldives. Charles Anderson, in 2009, he did report, because he was on a safari, he did see Olive Ridleys free swimming in the Maldives, but they're very pelagic. They're more associated with deeper water. You have to really travel quite far away offshore. It's not a species you're going to really encounter when you're snorkeling or when you're diving, but if you take a boat outside, maybe 20 kilometers, 30 kilometers offshore, you may encounter the Olive Ridley. But the most unique behavior of the Olive Ridley and the behavior that probably puts it at most risk to ghost net entanglement is the fact that they nest in a very peculiar way. It's really quite special. It's called an aribadas. And an aribadas is when it stands for, it's basically a mass congregation. It's a mass arrival. So many thousands of individual Olive Ridleys will congregate in a particular area. I've got a little map here again. The area that we're looking at is on the east coast of India. This area is called Orissa. Hundreds and thousands of Olive Ridleys arrive in this area in the north-east monsoon, so between December and April, with a peak in about February. And they migrate from large distances. As I said, they move from great distances between feeding and breeding grounds. So they do migrate huge distances, and they make their way over to the breeding ground, again, interacting with ghost nets, interacting with fishing techniques as well. Once they've reproduced and the female lays the eggs on the beach in Orissa, they then start to migrate outwards. They migrate back to their feeding ground. So again, they're moving across areas that's heavily fished with gill nets. In the south of Sri Lanka, there's reports of a really dense feeding ground. So there's a large population of Olive Ridleys just in the south there. So it's likely a lot of the females are moving from Orissa, and they just migrate even temporarily just to the south of Sri Lanka to temporarily feed, and then they can just move on that way. And again, any hatchlings that emerge will just become oceanic, and they'll just disappear into the oceans and drift that way. There was an incident in Andhra Pradesh in February of this year to prove that these turtles do interact with fishing vessels, because 800 individuals actually washed ashore on the beaches. And there's a picture, I have a picture here of that. Here we go. So yeah, 800 individuals actually washed ashore, and what it was found out is every single individual had classic traits of entanglement. They were entangled in trawling nets, and they had deep lacerations around their flippers. They also had lacerations around their neck as well. So they were actually caught by shrimp trawling. Now, unfortunately, during the aribadas, it coincides with the very peak season of fishing. And unfortunately, shrimp fishing or shrimp trawling is one of the main types of fishing used in India on the east coast. And these are often fishing illegally, unfortunately, even though rules are set in place. They're fishing illegally because they're a little bit too close to shore. They're supposed to be 8 kilometers offshore. Sometimes they venture maybe 5 kilometers inshore. So they get a bit too close, often where the Olive Ridleys are, and they entangle themselves as they're trawling. Often they don't have TEDs. If they do, they may be tied up so that they can't escape. So this is why we have 800 washing up on one day in February. It's estimated around 10 to 15,000 Olive Ridleys actually die every year because of fishing by bycatch. So just a couple of facts and figures. This is from the data that we collected and also from the Marine Savers team. 42% chance of encountering turtles. That's quite staggering. So from our database, every net that we record, we also record whether there was a turtle entangled in it. And it turns out that our entire database, there is a 42% chance. So if you go out and find a ghost net, you have a 42% chance that there's going to be a turtle entangled. There's 108 turtles since 2011. So again, this is only a fraction, by the way, because these are all coastal. These are very close to shore. We don't go out and we don't go looking for entangled turtles. We rely on marine biologists, people like yourself, reporting it and helping the Olive Ridley. So likely that figure is actually much larger than the figure that I'm showing you there. 67% of them entangled are juveniles, which means that they're below 60 centimeters. They could be sub-adults technically, but it's very difficult to sex juvenile Olive Ridleys, or any turtle for that case. So 67%, a high proportion are juveniles. So again, they're following oceanic currents. They're interacting with the purse seine fisheries in the west, the gillnet fisheries in the northern borders, and also in the east as well. 21% are females. Again, kind of makes sense because they're hanging around in the breeding grounds and then they migrate after nesting. Only 5% are males. Very strange. Maybe an area of research. Start tagging males and seeing where they actually go. Nobody really knows. There's lots of information about females because they're often tagged. But males are very difficult to tag because they're difficult to find, so we don't actually know where they go. So it could be a clue as to why the females and why the juveniles are actually entangling themselves and not so much the males. January seems to be a peak month. This year, in 2014, we had 20 turtles entangled. That was over a space of 6 days, so a very peak month indeed. It kind of coincided with the Olive Ridley Project because as it kind of became a bit more known, people were aware of it and started reporting. So that number could be a bit biased, so we might start finding that actually that number's a lot higher as we start to branch out. Species found, as you can imagine, 93% of them are Olive Ridley. Only 1% is green. We've only found one green turtle. That was in Gili Lankan Fushi in North Mali. And then we have the hawksbill at around 6%, so only maybe 2 or 3 of those caught. So the ghost net figures, these are the types of ghost nets that are in our database, what we're finding. By the way, if anybody wants this information, I'm happy to give it to you guys if you want to write about it or whatever. I'm happy to share that with you. We have currently around 150 fishing net samples. This was from July of this year. Since then, we've had nearly 50 more nets coming in. So this was July of this year. Of that, 68 individual cases. So the majority of the fishing nets that we find, or ghost nets that we find, don't just come on as like this. They come in huge conglomerates, so many different samples in that huge net. Most fishing nets go unrecorded. As you can imagine, it's only the ones that we find close to shore. If you were to go out on a boat, you're going to find huge quantities of fishing nets out there. Also, we're only just starting to get information from India, also Sri Lanka, and that number's starting to increase as word is increasing. Entanglements are with multi-filament nets, and what I mean by that is if you were to take this twine and twist it, you'll see different strands in there. Monofilament would be like a fishing line, just a single filament. Again, different story in India. If you go to India, it's mainly monofilament nets that are trapping Olive Ridleys. So it does determine what area you are in the Indian Ocean determines what type of net is entangling the turtles. It has an average mesh size of around 249 millimeters. So if you were unfortunate enough to find an Olive Ridley or even a ghost net, if it has a mesh size, that's the distance between the kind of webbing. If it has a mesh size of around 249 millimeters, there's a pretty high chance it could potentially entangle a turtle. Actually, we found entanglements in much less than that. In 50 millimeters, we found entanglements of Olive Ridleys, all the way up to like 1,000 millimeters. So pretty much any style of net with any webbing that I mentioned does have the chance of entangling a turtle.